All right, let's get right into it. For 7 long years, two of the absolute biggest companies on the planet were locked in this epic legal feud that totally reshaped the entire smartphone industry. And I mean, this wasn't just some boring lawsuit. It was a global war, a war over patents, over design, and really over the very soul of the modern smartphone. And it all kicked off with this, an absolutely furious vow from Apple's co-founder Steve Jobs. He was convinced that Google's Android, and by extension Samsung, had just flat out stolen Apple's revolutionary creation. You see, for him, this wasn't just business, it was deeply personal. He was ready to go, in his own words, thermonuclear. So the first shots were fired back in 2011. You gotta remember, Apple had completely changed the game with the iPhone, and they were, well, fiercely protective of it. So when Samsung, who was actually one of Apple's own parts suppliers, released a new phone, Apple saw it as a blatant copying. And this right here really gets to the heart of Apple's whole complaint. Look at this. The iPhone 3GS versus Samsung's Galaxy S. Both have that sleek, glossy black finish, both have a grid of colorful app icons, and yep, both even have that single round home button. For Apple, the similarities weren't just striking, they were, frankly, unforgivable. So, on April 15th, 2011, Apple made it official. They sued Samsung, and their lawyers did not pull any punches. They used the incredibly strong phrase, slavishly copying. The message couldn't have been clearer. This was a declaration of war. And Samsung, they didn't just take the punch. They hit back, and they hit back hard. Apple sued in the US, so Samsung countersued on its home turf and pretty much everywhere else. All of a sudden, this wasn't just one lawsuit. It exploded into this sprawling global conflict with over 50 cases in more than 10 countries. The patent war was on. Okay, now let's get to the main event. The summer of 2012, inside a federal courtroom in San Jose, California. This is where the real fight, the core of the US battle, would go down. And there were billions of dollars on the line. The courtroom drama was just intense. Apple did something really unusual. They revealed their own top-secret prototypes, these designs that the public had never ever seen before. Their whole strategy was to prove to the jury that the final iPhone design wasn't some obvious thing. No, it was a result of years of hard work and innovation that they believed Samsung had just completely skipped over. So you're probably wondering, what were they actually fighting about? Well, it all came down to these key patents. And these are things that, we totally take for granted today. Stuff like the slide to unlock gesture, that springy bounce back effect when you scroll to the end of a list, pinch to zoom, even the super basic stuff like the phone's rounded rectangular shape and that grid of icons on the home screen. All of that was at the very heart of Apple's case. So after just a few weeks of testimony, the jury came back with a verdict. And the number was staggering. They awarded Apple over $1 billion in damages. $1 billion. They found that Samsung had willfully infringed on Apple's patents. It was just a massive, headline-grabbing victory. The trial got so intense it even pushed the judge to her breaking point. At one point, Apple's lawyers submitted this ridiculously long witness list, and Judge Lucy Koh, who was famous for her no-nonsense style, shot back with this incredible line. It was one of those rare moments of dark humor in a very, very serious fight. But here's the thing, while that US trial got all the headlines, this war was being fought on multiple fronts. Apple and Samsung were going at it in courtrooms all over the world at the same time. And it led to this patchwork of confusing and sometimes totally contradictory rulings. I mean, the global results were just pure chaos. In South Korea, it was basically a draw. Japan, a win for Samsung. Germany, a win for Apple, with a temporary ban on a Samsung tablet. But then you go to the UK, and the court sided with Samsung in a very, very public way. It was a legal tug-of-war, and nobody seemed to be winning overall. And that UK ruling, it had this amazing, slightly insulting twist. The judge actually forced Apple to publicly state that Samsung didn't copy them, adding that Samsung's tablets were, quote, not as cool as the iPad. The implication was, how could they be copies if they just weren't as stylish? A pretty humbling moment for Apple, for sure. So after years of this global legal crossfire, it seems like both companies realized it was just a crazy expensive distraction. So, in mid-2014, they called a truce. Now, it wasn't a peace treaty, there was no big licensing deal or anything. But it was an agreement to drop all the lawsuits against each other outside of the United States and just focus the fight there. So, back in the US, that billion-dollar verdict, that was just the beginning of another long, drawn-out battle. Samsung immediately started this war of attrition, fighting the decision through years and years of appeals that would eventually go all the way to the Supreme Court. And you know what? Samsung's strategy worked. That initial billion-dollar number was slowly but surely chipped away. After retrials found some errors in the original math, the amount Samsung actually ended up paying by 2015 was cut nearly in half, down to about $548 million. But one huge legal question was still hanging out there. It was all about these things called design patents. The big question was this: should Samsung have to pay damages based on the entire profit of a smartphone just because it copied a few design elements, like the rounded corners? Samsung argued absolutely not, and the Supreme Court actually agreed to hear the case. And in what was a really landmark decision, the Supreme Court unanimously sided with Samsung. They ruled that, yeah, damages for design patent infringement could be limited to the profit from just a single component, not necessarily the whole shebang. This was a major change to patent law and a huge legal victory for Samsung. And then it was just over. After 7 years. 7 years of trials, endless appeals, all of it. In June 2018, the two companies just quietly settled. No big press conference, no victory lap. That thermonuclear war we talked about? It ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. Just a confidential legal filing. So after all of that, what did it all really mean? What is the lasting legacy of this epic corporate war? And believe it or not, how does it still affect the phone that's probably in your pocket right now? Well, this war left a permanent mark. For one, Samsung, kind of forced to innovate, developed its own design language that's now completely distinct from Apple's. That design rivalry was really forged in this legal fire. The whole industry got cautious, avoiding anything that looked too iPhone-like. Even tiny details changed, like Android replacing that patented bounce-back scroll with a simple glow. But maybe the biggest outcome was this. While Android won the war for global users, Apple proved that by protecting its design, it could completely own the most profitable high-end slice of the market, a strategy that still defines them today. And the market data kind of tells a different side of the story. While Apple was winning those early battles in court, Android, led by Samsung, was absolutely winning the war for global market share. They commanded a massive 75% of the market during that decade. Which brings us to the final big question. Apple proved its point and walked away with over $500 million. Samsung was forced to get more creative with its designs, but ended up becoming the world's #1 smartphone maker. So after 7 years, all the lawyers, all the headlines, who do you think really won?